jump in. I'm Nathan Hulbert. Hello, everybody. I'm a professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. Here at Teachers College, I'm in the Math, Science, and Technology department in a program called Communication, Media, and Learning Technologies Design. As you might expect from my paper, and if we've had a chance to get to know one another, I'm interested in design. I'm interested in how design intersects with how people think and how people learn. And I'm excited to talk with you today about one of those studies that we did. In this paper, we're really sort of trying to challenge some of the assumptions or some of the common practices of educational game design. Educational game design, like most design, I think educational design is often about creating experiences or obstacles or challenges with a goal towards teaching very specific content, skills, or practices. But games are a peculiar kind of a thing, right? Players don't always see game experiences as having some sort of meaning or value outside of the game experience. And, that's probably not a bad thing in many cases, right? So while the learning sciences has been pretty effective at creating games and other kinds of educational technology where learners encounter and deeply interact with concepts that we'd like them to learn, it's often true with games that those experiences and those ideas get stuck within the game itself. They don't see them as applicable outside of the game. And so our goal here in this work was to examine ways we could create games that encourage players to actually take their experiences, their prior knowledge, their intuitions, and apply them, intuitions and things that they've built through their own interactions in the world, and apply them into their experience and their interpretations of what's happening in the game itself. And furthermore, to ensure that they can take those experiences, those intuitions, and their experiences in the game and use those to experiment with and tinker with representations and practices that might have value outside of the game itself. In essence, this was really about kind of pushing the design debate beyond educational games that assume a somewhat standard endpoint where every player is encouraged to learn some sort of common or formally accepted definition or concept towards learner-centered game designs that actually allow them to have diverse experiences, diverse explorations, and hopefully to have those kinds of explorations that have some sort of meaning or value for things that they might encounter beyond just the things that we have in the game itself. This is really about, building games to be for inquiry rather than for answers. We see this as kind of a step towards creating games to be what Papert referred to as objects to think with. Of course, when he used the term object to think with, he was referring to the logo turtle, right? This thing that has all sorts of meaning and has all sorts of knowledge connected to professional practices and other types of serious domains. But it's also an artifact that learners or users can have some sort of personal identification with. They can feel a personal connection to. They can sort of put themselves inside of it, and they can sort of think with this object. And to this end, we propose this constructible authentic representation design framework for thinking about how could you create games to be something like an object to think with. And this constructible authentic representation framework is about building games that have meaningful opportunities for learners to build something inside of a game that has value and meaning in that game itself, that the construction process itself uses primitives or pieces that have sort of concepts integrated into their use and in their meaning, and also that players would, as part of that construction process, they would be creating artifacts that have meaning and value, not just in the game, but also outside of the game as well. To test this, we created a game called Particles. And Particles is a platformer where, like most other platformers, the goal is to get your character from one point in the level to another point in the level. But it's different in that the player actually has an opportunity to kind of redesign the game level as they play through it. And they do this by adding and removing bonds between atoms in this kind of atomizer construction space to create different types of molecular structures. Once they've built these molecular structures, players can actually add blocks into the game world that are made up of a great many number of those molecules that they've just designed. And then the blocks that they add to the game world actually have properties that are emergent from the interactions of many of these player designed molecules. And so in that way, gameplay itself isn't just about running from one point in the level to the other. It's about kind of tinkering and experimenting with molecular level structures to create different types of blocks that could have properties that will help the player to reach their goal that they have in the game. By the way, the URL is there at the top. Feel free to check it out. It's a little bit different than the one you're seeing here because we have continued to do some work on it. But of course, your feedback is always welcome. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details about the study, but I want to just tell you that we did conduct a study of this game. We, in particular, were trying to understand how players interacted in the game space, how they made sense of the representations and the game experiences, and also how those interactions might have become part of their thinking process beyond the game. So we conducted some semi-structured cognitive clinical interviews before and after playing the game, and took a lot of extensive field notes and screen recordings of their gameplay. And we found a couple, I think, interesting things. One was that players actually used their intuitions about real-world objects to explore and experiment with molecular structures in this building space that we call the atomizer. They took their ideas about shapes, they took their ideas about objects and why they think objects might have certain properties to think about what kinds of shapes they might want to create or draw within the atomizer. And they engaged in this experimentation through not just the atomizer, but also through the level and the way in which the level kind of encouraged them to try new things. After playing the game, players tended to provide much more nuanced and complex explanations of why materials have properties that they have. And real materials, so like Lego blocks, they would tell us, instead of saying, I think Legos are hard because they have hard elements in them, they would say more complex things relating to the bonds and the molecular structures that might make up these objects. And they frequently referenced the game when they did that. Sometimes they did this explicitly, and sometimes they just would create explanations or actually create drawings that would reference back to some of the representations they had encountered and used in the game space. Again, suggesting that their experiences in this place became a set of kind of representations and tools that they could use to think through problems that were not just relevant to the game itself, but also to things outside of the game.